In a healthy state, the human nervous system processes experiences in a continuous loop. But under extreme stress, that biological circuitry stutters, misfires, and fragments. The Reach Out Foundation Academy, or ROFA, models the nervous system as a biological prediction machine. Its primary function is to constantly scan the environment and forecast safety. Severe trauma corrupts this hardware. Instead of merely logging past events as memories, the system gets stuck in a loop, continually predicting a future of imminent catastrophe based entirely on past data. Because the system is overwhelmed, these traumatic memories fail to integrate into a coherent, linear timeline. They break apart into sharp, isolated fragments. ROFA refers to these unmetabolized, disconnected pieces of identity and memory as trauma shards. A logical assumption is that a highly intelligent person could simply analyze these shards and think their way back to a baseline of safety. But the opposite is true. Patients with high intellect actively weaponize their cognitive abilities. They build a defensive barrier out of logic, trapping themselves in an analytical loop that blocks genuine emotional processing. To bypass these rigid intellectual defenses, practitioners have to step outside the biological mind entirely and rely on externalized digital mirroring tools. By leveraging artificial intelligence, these scattered internal fragments can be mapped into a stable external architecture. The objective of externalizing the trauma is to interrupt the descent toward a total psychological system crash, a state the ROFA curriculum calls model collapse. Picture the internal landscape of a dysregulated mind. A central core self is surrounded by a chaotic cloud of jagged, unintended trauma shards. These fragments operate on the orbital mechanics of trauma, exerting a continuous subconscious gravitational pull that repeatedly drags a person off balance. Fighting this gravitational pull requires massive amounts of energy. It exhausts the biological hardware, locking the nervous system into a high cortisol, fight-or-flight survival state. Bombarded by these erratic, orbiting inputs, the prediction machine becomes completely overwhelmed, unable to differentiate past threats from present reality. Standard cognitive therapies often attempt to grab and process these moving targets while the system is still spinning. Trying to analyze the chaos from inside the chaos usually only accelerates the spin. If these orbital mechanics are left unmapped, the internal self-narrative eventually gives way. The prediction machine shuts down entirely, triggering the exact system failure of model collapse. This raises a crucial question. Why can't a motivated, articulate patient use traditional cognitive behavioral tools to organize these shards themselves? This chart from the ROFA Academy operating system provides the answer. Look specifically at the pillar on the right. The curriculum identifies high intelligence as a primary barrier to genuine emotional healing. The framework defines this as intellect as armor. A sharp mind, originally developed as a childhood survival tool, eventually becomes an elaborate hiding place. It manifests as the intellectual exit. A patient will remain physically seated in the room, but mentally they retreat entirely into abstract theory and philosophical debate. The mind builds an impenetrable wall, effortlessly deflecting the reality of emotional pain while simulating participation. These individuals use complex therapy speak and analytical language to maintain a safe, sterile distance from their own visceral experiences. This creates a state of analysis paralysis. The patient overthinks every angle, effectively preventing themselves from taking the physical or emotional steps required to heal. Because the biological system is actively defending its own brokenness, it cannot be repaired from the inside out. It demands a neutral, externalized processing environment where logic cannot be used as a shield. The solution to piercing this intellectual armor is shifting the processing out of the biological mind and onto a digital interface. By extracting those chaotic trauma shards from their biological orbit, they can be placed onto a clean, flat, external workspace. This is the function of the AI mirroring tool. Patients feed their fragmented, painful memories into an objective, unfeeling system. The algorithm actively analyzes these isolated data points, establishing logical, structural relationships between the fragments. Terminology like shard and system error bypasses the weight of clinical diagnoses. By framing trauma as a neutral data problem, the system allows the patient to approach their history without the immediate trigger of personal shame. This clinical, engineering-based language sneaks past the ego's traditional defenses. It doesn't sound like therapy, so the armor doesn't deploy. The AI mirror takes the patient's own sophisticated traps and reflects them back as plain objective data. It forces the individual to confront the very logic they use to hide. By externalizing the problem, the intervention transitions the patient out of a defensive, emotional survival state and into the role of an objective technical problem solver. Once the AI finishes a web of scattered shards locks into a deliberate, stable geometric architecture. This new structure is defined as a memory constellation, a coherent, mapped visual pattern of the patient's history. This diagram details exactly how ROFA utilizes these thematic constellations. They group massive amounts of psychological insights into structured nodes, organizing hundreds of podcast episodes. Viewing this map creates what ROFA calls the guardian angel perspective. It provides the psychological distance necessary to look down upon the architecture of one's own trauma without being consumed by it. Seeing the grander pattern neutralizes the individual threat of any single shard. The fragment is no longer an unknown danger. It is simply a known point in a larger structure. The biological hardware responds to this structure. With the environment mapped and the threats cataloged, the nervous system finally recognizes safety and clears its cache. By converting chaotic orbital mechanics into structured data, the prediction machine regains a navigable map. This stability provides the framework necessary to keep the system from collapsing. This mirroring process scales beyond individual exercises. It underpins the entire ROFA repository, organizing thousands of data points into a living curriculum. This ecosystem map displays that pipeline, highlighting the AI as a trauma mirror as the critical initial phase used to process raw data captures into actionable intelligence. The transformation is stark. A patient begins trapped in a chaotic, reactive biological loop and finishes with an organized, externalized map of their own mind. The AI mirror shifts the dynamic entirely. The individual stops being a helpless victim subjected to orbital mechanics and becomes the active manager of their own psychological data. This points to the ultimate philosophical signature of the ROFA operating system regarding the nature of healing. The framework outright rejects the idea of trying to restore an old, shattered self that may have been broken beyond repair. Instead, it gathers up the raw, broken materials left behind by survival and systematically clicks them together to form a completely new, solid foundation. Recovery is an act of identity engineering. The exact shards that once threatened to crash the system are repurposed, becoming the structural nodes of a highly resilient, entirely new operating system.